HOA. Karen called cops when I refused to move into her HOA, then froze when I showed my badge I had just bought a beautiful little house on the edge of town. It was quiet, private, and nestled right where the city faded into countryside. After serving in law enforcement for 15 years, I was finally ready for a life without sirens, paperwork, and stress. I wanted nothing more than a peaceful place to drink my coffee, maybe garden, and unwind. That's why I picked this particular house. It was not under any homeowners association. I'd done my homework. I studied the zoning maps, reviewed the deed, double-checked with the county. No HOA, no random fines, no unnecessary rules. Just a home in my own slice of land. The morning I started moving in, the sun was barely up. I parked my moving truck along the curb in front of my property and started unloading boxes. Breathing in the fresh morning air, that's when I saw her. A woman mid-50s, maybe with tight blonde curls and a permanent frown carved into her face. She marched across the street like she owned every inch of it, her arms folded like she was heading into battle. She didn't greet me, didn't smile, just walked up, narrowed her eyes and said, "You can't park that truck here. This is HOA property." I paused, confused. "Excuse me," I said, brushing the dust off my hands. "This isn't part of your HOA. I made sure before I bought it. You can check the county zoning map if you want." She didn't flinch, just shook her head like I was some stubborn child. "Everything on this street is HOA controlled," she said, voice sharp. "You'll need to register your house with us. There are rules about parking, landscaping, mailbox design, everything. We expect all residents to comply." I raised an eyebrow. "I think you're mistaken. My property is independently zoned. I'm not part of any HOA." I kept my voice. Careers in law enforcement taught me not to escalate needlessly but firm. I wasn't here to be intimidated on my first day. Her jaw tightened. She crossed her arms tighter, her lips curling like she'd bitten into something sour. "Now that's what the last guy said too," she muttered, almost like a threat. "We brought him around." That raised a red flag. I glanced back at my house, then looked at her again. "I'm not the last guy, ma'am. I've got the documents. I'm not joining your HOA, and unless you've got legal authority over my land, I'd appreciate it if you let me get back to my move-in." Her eyes scanned me, calculating. I could already tell she wasn't used to people pushing back, especially not someone who wouldn't flinch. She didn't say anything else, just gave me a nasty little smirk and walked back across the street. Muttering to herself, I watched her go. One thing was clear, Karen didn't like hearing no. I had a feeling she wasn't finished with me yet. The days that followed were anything but peaceful. From the moment I finished moving in, Karen made it her personal mission to make me feel unwelcome. Started small, passive-aggressive notes left on my door, written in bold red ink, unsigned, but obviously hers. The first one read, "Your truck violates HOA parking guidelines. Move it or be fined." Another one claimed my trash cans were left out too long. Then came a complaint about my mailbox not being HOA approved, even though it was the same standard design used by most homes on the block. I just kept calm. I knew I wasn't under any HOA's authority. I wasn't about to be bullied into pretending I was. By the end of the week, she escalated. I had movers coming back to drop off a final load of furniture. As they pulled into my driveway, Karen stormed across the street again and physically stood in their path, waving her arms and yelling, "This delivery is unauthorized. You need HOA permission to use heavy trucks on community roads." The movers looked at me, baffled. I walked out and told them to ignore her and continue. Then I turned to her and said, firmly but respectfully, "Karen, this is not your jurisdiction. Please step off my property." She huffed and walked away, muttering that people like me always think the rules don't apply. I thought that might be the end of it. I was wrong. A few days later, I received an official-looking envelope in the mail. Inside were printed violation notices from the HOA board complete, with fines for supposed infractions. $75 for an unauthorized mailbox, $100 for landscape non-compliance, and $150 for improper vehicle storage. I laughed out loud. It was almost impressive how far she was willing to go with this fantasy. I knew the law, and I knew these fines were unenforceable. Still, I started documenting everything: photos, mail, even installing a security camera facing the street. If this was going to turn ugly, I'd be ready. Then came the moment that crossed the line. One sunny afternoon, I decided to install a small flagpole in my front yard. Nothing extravagant, just a 6-foot aluminum pole to hang the American flag. I drilled it securely into the ground near the front porch, and before I could even step back to admire it, I heard the shriek. "What do you think you're doing?" Karen screamed from her driveway, pointing like I'd just committed a crime. "That is not HOA approved." "You're trespassing on HOA land?" Stared at her in disbelief. "Karen, this is my yard. I have every right to place a flagpole on my property." "I'm calling the police!" she shouted, pulling out her phone. "Let's see what they say when they get here." Crossed my arms unbothered. "Please do." As she dialed, pacing and ranting, I stood calmly on my porch watching. I had a feeling things were about to get very interesting. The patrol car rolled up about 15 minutes after Karen made the call. 2 uniformed officers stepped out, both of them wearing the look of men who were already tired of neighborhood disputes before even hearing a word. Karen practically sprinted toward them, arms waving, voice rising in a hysterical tone. "Officers, thank God you're here. This man is violating HOA regulations. He put up a flagpole without approval, refuses to follow our rules, and he's refusing to register his property with the association." She pointed aggressively at my yard like it was a crime scene. "What?" Officers exchanged glances, clearly trying to make sense of what was happening. One of them raised an eyebrow and asked, "Ma'am, what exactly do you believe is illegal here?" Karen launched into a long-winded rant about bylaws, architectural committees, unauthorized structures, and a whole list of imaginary infractions. The officers patiently listened, nodding slightly, though their expressions didn't show much concern. I waited quietly on my porch until one of them looked toward me and motioned for me to step forward. I walked down calmly, my hands visible and my demeanor steady. "Officers," I said, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." One of them nodded. "Can we see some ID, sir?" I reached into my back pocket, not for my driver's license, but for something else entirely. I pulled out my badge and flipped it open in one smooth motion. Their eyes flicked down to the emblem, then up at me. Their posture shifted slightly. I could see the recognition immediately. Karen, standing just a few feet away, froze mid-sentence. The color drained from her face like someone had hit a light switch. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. She blinked, then took a small step back as if she'd just realized the full weight of what she'd done. I kept my tone neutral, professional. "This property is outside the boundaries of the HOA. I have zoning maps and the deed, if you'd like to verify, but legally. None of their regulations apply to this house. Everything I've done here is within city code." One of the officers nodded again and turned toward Karen. His tone was firm now. "Ma'am, this appears to be a private property not governed by your HOA. He's done nothing wrong." Karen tried to protest, her voice trembling, but the mailbox. The flagpole. The second officer raised his hand gently to stop her. "Karen, this isn't an HOA enforcement issue. This looks more like harassment than a legal violation." She stood there, stunned, her phone still clutched in her hand. For a moment, she looked like she was deciding whether to argue further. Then she turned without another word and stormed back to her house. The officers turned back to me, their expressions lighter now. "Sorry about the trouble," one said. "We deal with these HOA squabbles more than we'd like." I just smiled. "No problem, officers. Thanks for your time." And with that, they drove off. I looked across the street at Karen's house, blinds now hastily drawn. The war she tried to start had just ended with nothing more than a badge and the truth. ChatGPT said, "The next morning, the street was unusually quiet. For the first time since I'd moved in, Karen didn't appear. No handwritten notices taped to my door. No accusations shouted from across the road. No HOA flyers tucked under my windshield. Just silence. It was almost eerie-like the calm after a storm. I stepped out onto my porch with a cup of coffee and looked across at her house. Curtains drawn, door shut, no sign of her pacing or patrolling the sidewalk. It was a sharp contrast to the chaos she had stirred just the day before. I had a feeling her ego was still recovering from the sting of being corrected in front of the very authority figure she'd tried to weaponize. Days passed and still nothing. No more phony HOA fines. No more interruptions. It was like someone had hit a mute button on her entire campaign. Then, about a week later, I received an envelope in the mail. This time, it was an actual letter from the HOA board, official letterhead and everything. I opened it cautiously, half expecting more threats or fabricated violations. But inside was just a single line. Please disregard all prior correspondence. Regarding your property, no further action will be taken. That was it. No apology, no explanation, just quiet surrender. They knew they'd been wrong. More importantly, they knew I knew the law. Out that weekend, I decided to take a walk through the neighborhood. It was the first time I truly felt like I could breathe here, like I wasn't walking through someone else's territory. As I strolled past houses and trimmed lawns, a few neighbors gave me nods. One older gentleman even gave a small smile and said, "Nice flagpole." I nodded back with a quiet thanks. Funny how respect shows up once people realize you won't be pushed around. As I neared Karen's house, I saw her standing just inside her front door. Her arms were crossed, same posture, same scowl, but this time, she didn't step outside.
Ow.
She didn't say a word. She just watched me from behind. The screen door, silent and stiff. For a second, our eyes met. And in that moment, I didn't feel anger or smugness, just confirmation. She'd finally realized the limits of her self-pointed authority. The badge I showed wasn't about intimidation. It was about truth. Facts don't need to yell. Finished my walk, feeling more grounded than ever. This wasn't just about one person's overreach or an overzealous HOA. It was a reminder. A reminder that some people use rules and fear to control others, to build a false sense of power. But real authority doesn't scream or bully, doesn't hide behind flyers and fines, stands quietly, speaks with clarity, and carries proof. I didn't win by shouting I won by standing firm, knowing my rights, and refusing to be shaken. And in the end, that's what silenced her louder than any argument ever could.